This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel's relationship with the U.S. is at an all-time low amid U.S. accusations of spying and threats to isolate Israel. Some congressional leaders say it's all just a presidential temper tantrum. And she's one of the fiercest critics of Islam, and it made her a target of constant threats. Ayaan Hirsi Ali on jihad, Sharia, and Islam's abuse of women. Plus, on the front lines against the Islamic State, Kurdish fighters in northern Iraq are fighting off the jihadi army. But to win, they need more help from America. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from our U.S. studios in Virginia Beach. Explosive accusations of an elaborate Israeli spying operation on U.S.-Iranian nuclear negotiations. The Wall Street Journal reports Israel obtained confidential information, then shared it with U.S. lawmakers trying to thwart a nuclear deal. Israel denies the charges. The revelations come as tensions between Israel and the U.S. are escalating. George Thomas has the details.
The Wall Street Journal, citing unnamed sources, says Israel was spying on negotiations between the United States and Iran. In trying to build a case against any potential deal with Iran, the newspaper says Israel obtained confidential information from U.S. briefings, informants, and diplomatic contacts in Europe, then shared that intelligence with U.S. lawmakers. One senior U.S. official told the paper that it's one thing for the U.S. and Israel to spy on each other. It's another for Israel to steal U.S. secrets and play them back to legislators to undermine U.S. diplomacy. The U.S. says it learned about the Israeli spying operations from America's own spies, who intercepted some Israeli messages. Israel denies that it was spying. It says it got the information on the Iran talks in other ways, like watching Iran's leaders and speaking with European officials about the Iran talks. This latest spat between the two countries comes as the White House continues to criticize Netanyahu for comments he made about a Palestinian state toward the end of Israel's election campaign. On Monday, Obama's top advisor questioned the Israeli Prime Minister's sincerity while addressing a left-wing Jewish group.
Such contradictory comments call into question his commitment to a two-state solution.
Netanyahu later said he wants a two-state solution, but under the right conditions. But the White House has kept up its criticism. McDonough also warned that Israel's so-called occupation of Palestinian land must end, and that drew thunderous applause from the crowd.
An occupation that has lasted for almost 50 years must end. And the Palestinian people must have the right to live in and govern themselves in their own sovereign state.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham slammed McDonough's speech, saying the language used by the Chief of Staff of the President of the United States is exactly what Hamas uses. Arizona Senator John McCain also weighed in, calling President Obama to put aside his personal issues with the Israeli Prime Minister.
The President should get over it. Get over your temper tantrum, Mr. President. It's time that we work together with our Israeli friends and try to stem this tide of ISIS and Iranian movement throughout the region, which is threatening the very fabric of the region. The President has his priorities so screwed up that it's unbelievable.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Joining us now for more on the U.S.-Israel relationship, our CBN terrorism analyst Eric Steckelbeck from Washington, D.C., and from Jerusalem, our CBN senior editor John Waggy and Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl. Eric, what's the feeling in Washington? Is President Obama turning on Israel? Is that the sense you get?
Chris, I think there's no doubt about it. It's pretty clear how he feels, I believe, about Benjamin Netanyahu individually. Obviously, the president strongly dislikes the Israeli prime minister, but also Israel in general. Benjamin Netanyahu is the antithesis of Barack Obama.
Yeah, it seems amazing that he seems to want more regime change in Israel than in Iran. Julie, What's the feeling in Israel about the Obama administration's attitude and their actions recently?
Well, you know, Chris, I mean, I think Israelis are troubled, but they'd like to just move on. They'd like to put this whole election thing behind them. The Obama administration or whoever it was, the Israeli left, tried their hardest to put Netanyahu out of power. It didn't work. Let's move on.
But, John, it doesn't seem like at least the Obama administration wants to move on. What are the ramifications of this rift?
Well, it's going to be bad, and it's not just going to be bad for Israel. In fact, the Israelis may surmount this, and they may have to broaden their outlook on how they look at defense and foreign policy and everything to include countries like Egypt and like Saudi Arabia just in the short term to deal with Iran. This is the kind of climate where I hate to say it, but wars can start.
Yeah, Eric, you seem to be agreeing with what John was saying. What are your thoughts about this?
I couldn't say it any better. That's exactly what it is. President Obama has a deep-seated animus, a hostility towards Israel. He sees Israel as the kind of the Western occupying power, occupying the poor, oppressed third world Palestinians. You know, we're in a world turned upside down when the U.S. government, the Obama administration, is reportedly talking about sanctioning Israel. Yet they want to lift sanctions against an Iranian regime, which has been the head of the terrorist snake for 36 years. And just recently, Chris, the supreme leader of Iran, during a rally in Tehran, called for death to America.
And that's why so much is at stake in the negotiations right now. Julie, you talked about the Israelis moving on, and Netanyahu right now has moved on in a sense. He's got enough seats to form a government. What do you think that government's going to look like?
It'll be a government that's based on security, though Netanyahu has said he's also really want to concentrate on the social reforms and the economy. It'll be a very right-wing government. It won't really be a government that wants to talk peace with the Palestinians.
Yeah, John, back to this issue with the U.S. and Israel. Congress seems to be taking Israel's side. Do you see a growing conflict between the branches of government, the legislature and the executive?
It isn't Congress that's moved. It's the White House and the State Department that have moved dramatically to a situation of open confrontation with Israel. So yes, I think that Congress they're alarmed by it. I think many on Capitol Hill are alarmed by it. Israel is our closest ally and the only democratic ally in the region, and that hasn't changed over a period of decades.
Right. Eric, final question to you. What do you see in the future for U.S.-Israel relations?
I believe that the Obama administration, Chris, is doing its best to leave the relationship in tatters. President Obama gets his way, and he gets this grand bargain with Iran over its nuclear weapons program. Suppose Israel says, hey, we can't live with this, and strikes Iran's nuclear facilities militarily. That is a very real possibility. And if that happens, you can only imagine the scorn that the Obama administration and the world will feel against Israel. It's very biblical. You know, Zechariah talks about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone for the whole world. And I think we may be moving into those times now.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I know another scripture many Christians cite is Genesis 12:2-3, that those that bless Israel will be blessed. Those that curse Israel will be cursed. John and Julie, how do you think Christians should be praying for Israel right now?
Pray that the Israeli people will keep going on, that they'll be strong, that their hearts will be turned towards the Lord. I think, in many cases, I feel more afraid for the United States.
You know, the United States is going to be entering into a 2016 race, and I think what Christians need to be praying for not only the presidential leadership, but also really that the truth will come out. The whole Middle East is, as we've said over and over again, is a tinderbox, and so obviously prayer for our fellow brothers and sisters in the region all around who are suffering so much.
Great points for prayer. Eric Steckelback from Washington, D.C., John Waggy and Julie Stahl from Jerusalem, thanks for joining us. 367 members of the House of Representatives have sent the president a letter telling him that any deal with Iran has got to close the path to a nuclear bomb. The Hill reports the letter says that only then will Congress consider lifting economic sanctions on Iran. The Iranians want the sanctions lifted immediately, something the U.S. and Europeans oppose. Many critics question if Iran is serious about a deal that would stop their nuclear program. And some point to a recent rally in Iran. When the crowd shouted death to America, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, agreed, saying, of course, yes, death to America. And he criticized the U.S. for putting sanctions on Iran. Saudi Arabia launched airstrikes against the Houthi rebels in Yemen this week.
I wanted to meet with you to inform you that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia launched military operations in Yemen. The objective is to defend the legitimate government of President Hadi from the takeover attempts by the Houthi militias in Yemen.
Footage of the military offensive shows flashing lights and what sounds like machine gun fire. A Saudi-owned news outlet reports that the kingdom has deployed 100 fighter jets and 150,000 soldiers, as well as Navy units. Coming up, some view her as a hero and others a heretic. One thing is for certain, she says Islam must be defeated. Ayaan Hirsi Ali will explain why. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. For more than a decade, Ayaan Hirsi Ali has been a fierce critic of Islam. And as a result, she's also been a target of constant death threats. Here's why.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born a Muslim in Somalia, where she saw and experienced the brutal treatment of women and girls under fundamentalist Islam. As a young woman, she escaped from an arranged marriage and sought asylum in the Netherlands, where she rose to become a member of the Dutch Parliament and an outspoken critic of Islam. Based today in Washington, D.C., Hirsi Ali continues to risk her life to expose Islam, a religion that she says subjugates Muslim women to lives of slavery, suffering, and submission. Her latest book is called Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. In it, she makes the powerful case that a religious reformation is the only way to end terrorism, sectarian warfare, and repression of women and minorities that each year claim thousands of lives throughout the Muslim world.
For more about the truth behind Islam, CBN founder Pat Robertson spoke with Ayaan Hirsi Ali about jihad, Sharia, and the way women are mistreated in Muslim societies.
In most Muslim countries, especially in those countries where Sharia law or Islamic law is applied, the status of women is dire. Women must have a male guardian. They should ask permission before they even leave the house. If women are raped, then they have to prove their testimony is worth half of that of the rapist. They can inherit only half of what their brother inherits. There's a great deal of violence against women. They have to go out of the house covered from head to toe, ideally with a chaperone. So they are in a permanent house arrest where Islamic law is applied. And there are now Muslim women starting their own movements and trying to fight that back. There are Saudi women who are fighting for the right to drive. There are Egyptian women who are fighting against sexual harassment. 99% of Egyptian women report that they've at one time been harassed or subjected to some form of sexual harassment. There are almost 1,000 honor killings reported in Pakistan, and those are only the cases that are reported. There is so much more. So the position of the Muslim woman in 2015 is extremely dire.
You say, so many people, they say Islam is a religion of peace, and then they say that the ISIS and others, there's just an aberrant group of Islamists. And in your book, you talk about jihadis, and you talk about the culture of death, and you talk about the fact that it comes directly from the Quran, the Hadith, and other writings having to do with Muhammad himself. Could you explain what you're talking about?
Well, I want to start by saying Islam can become a religion of peace once it's reformed, but Islam today, unreformed in its pure form, it's not a religion of peace. I describe in the book 3 sets of Muslims. One set of Muslims who are oriented toward Medina when the Prophet emigrated from Mecca, and he engaged in war, and he, doled out war booty. He beheaded people himself. And so in Medina, there was a period that looked pretty much like what we are seeing now the Islamic State do in Iraq and Syria. But before that, early on in the first 10 years, he was preaching peace and love and, charity, and that was more spiritual, maybe what we would describe as a religion today. And I think that the majority of Muslims are Mecca-oriented, but there is a minority, a disturbing minority, an increasing minority that is using the example of the Prophet Muhammad to carry out undescribable atrocities against women, against Christians against Yazidis, other religious minorities, against gay people, you know, and it's never ending. Anti-Semitism is back in Europe in a way we haven't seen since 1945, and that is because of the presence of radical Islam there. And the question today is, how do we deal with this? If you look at the life of Muhammad and you try to emulate him and do exactly the same things he did back in the 7th century, then you're going to get what we see now, and it's called the Islamic State. And it's not only the Islamic State. You know, Brunei has just reintroduced Sharia law. Saudi Arabia is run under that law that Muhammad introduced. There are beheadings in Saudi Arabia that take place, I don't know, pretty much on a daily basis, and becoming more frequent. People are hung in Iran, and all of these atrocities, again, justified in the name of Muhammad.
Let me ask you about the jihad thing. You know, we're told here by the so-called moderate Muslims that jihad is merely a struggle of the soul. You find it not to be the case. What is jihad and what you've experienced?
Jihad is holy war. It's a declaration of holy war on infidels. It's to invite people who are not Muslim to the religion, and if they refuse to take the sword or use violence and make them an offer, convert, pay a discriminatory tax if you are Christian or Jew, or die. And we see this applied today by this so-called caliphate in Iraq and in Syria. That is jihad. And when moderate Muslims or so-called moderate Muslims say it means jihad means something else, I just want to tell them denial is not a strategy. The more Muslims deny that there's something inherently wrong with Islam that needs to change, the longer the suffering continues.
What about Iran? We're negotiating Iran, and the leader of Iran just said, you know, death to America, and here we're trying to make a deal with them. Do you think you can deal with these people?
The Iranian regime, as opposed to the Iranian people, and we really must see this separately. I think that the Iranian people are much closer to accepting the U.S. and the existence of the State of Israel and just want to get on with their lives. But the Islamic Republic, which is this regime, they have promised over and over again death to Israel, death to America. They're in the process of developing a nuclear bomb, and they've made their ambitions very, very clear. They want to eliminate the State of Israel, and I think that it is naive to not take them at their word and think, you know, they've been ambitiously working to this end for the last 34 years, and suddenly they're going to change their minds because we tell them to. I think it would be very naive and trusting of us if we believe the mullahs.
Ayaan Hirsi's alley book is called Heretic. You can find much more of that interview with her at cbnnews.com. Up next, we go to the front lines in northern Iraq where Peshmerga fighters are holding off the Islamic State. But for how long? That story when we return. Peshmerga means those who face death. They're Kurdish soldiers battling in the Islamic State in northern Iraq, and they've made significant gains. Now they say they need more help from America if they're to defeat ISIS. CBN News chief international correspondent Gary Lane traveled to Iraqi Kurdistan to learn more.
Meet the Peshmerga, frontline fighters protecting Iraqi Kurdistan from the Islamic State. This experienced soldier joined them in 1982. He's fought in many battles, mostly against Saddam Hussein's army.
Fighting against Saddam was different than fighting ISIS. With Saddam, we fought against an army. The ISIS terrorists are cowards because they are killing women and children.
Other Peshmerga troops agree.
The Islamic State fighters are terrorists. They are animals. We are fighting for the whole world. We will never ever kneel down to them. We are thankful for the American help. ISIS is not a professional army. We've been fighting them bravely and defeating them. Thanks be to God.
We're at Tiger Camp. This is the most forward Kurdish army Peshmerga base camp, not far from the city of Mosul. Now, talking to these soldiers, these troops here, they've told me they can defeat ISIS, but what they really need to do that is American advanced weaponry. Sirwan Barzani is the nephew of the Kurdistan president. He commands the Peshmerga in this part of Iraq.
My sector is more than 130 kilometers long, but we don't get any new weapons on ground in our hands. What we need heavy machine weapons. We need the big calibers. We need anti-tanks. We need the same our enemy, the terrorists, they're using against us.
Some of the rifles used by the Peshmerga are more than 30 years old. So why don't they have new ones and more advanced weaponry promised to them by the United States? I pose that question to the Kurdistan Foreign Relations Director.
This is our question as well. Is there a political ceiling that they don't want the Kurds to be strong enough?
So if there is resistance, where is it coming from? Washington or Baghdad?
It's with both, because unfortunately Baghdad is part of the problem, is not part of the solution so far.
Before stepping aside last year, former Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki reportedly gave hundreds of millions of dollars to Shia militias for the fight against the Islamic State. Current Prime Minister al-Abadi has agreed to send $1 billion to the Peshmerga, but that's for salaries, not advanced American weaponry. And neighboring countries Iran and Turkey fear a well-armed Kurdistan might declare independence from Iraq and then threaten them. But the Deputy Speaker of the Kurdistan Parliament told me stronger forces would be good for those countries by defeating ISIS and bringing stability to the region.
Though we have made progress in talks with Turkey, we have not convinced them of this. We hope to persuade them that a stronger Kurdistan will help regional security.
The Iraqi military is fighting to win the city of Tikrit back from ISIS. And once Tikrit is liberated, the Iraqi military will set its sights on freeing Mosul from ISIS control. The Kurds say they'll join Iraqi forces in that battle if asked. Hundreds of their Peshmerga troops have already died fighting ISIS, and they say without the advanced weapons they need, many more may die in Mosul and elsewhere in Iraq.
If we give life, why we are not receiving heavy weapons to protect this life and to make a decisive war against ISIS and to make it as quickly as possible?
Gary Lane, CBN News, Malakara, Iraq.
When we come back, Israel honors former President George W. Bush. Finally this week, the State of Israel recognized the former president for his support of the Jewish state this week. Former Israeli President Shimon Peres presented former U.S. President George W. Bush with the Friends of Zion Award. The ceremony took place at Bush's Presidential Center in Dallas. Peres said President Bush always demonstrated concern for the security of Israel and worked towards peace. The Friends of Zion Heritage Center in Jerusalem features others non-Jews who are recognized for their support of Israel and the Jewish people, including President Harry S. Truman and Oskar Schindler. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. We'll see you next week in Jerusalem.